Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to go over some major issues in the area of ethics. I know we've already talked about it some in class, but I still want to go ahead and look at some major topics, major issues we need to deal with when we look at the area of ethics. When we talk about ethics, we're normally talking about what is right or wrong. And we're talking about right or wrong in a moral sense. We have to be very careful here because many times people will confuse what is meant by right and wrong. They will use it in a functional sense versus a moral sense. And this leads to some confusion. For example, some people may say, there's no such thing as absolute right and wrong, because whereas it is right for me to be a teacher, it is wrong for you to be a teacher. Or whereas it is right for you to be a doctor, a surgeon, it would be wrong for me to be a doctor surgeon. Well, that's not using the words right and wrong in a moral sense. They're being used in a functional sense. For example, if I say I would be a bad quarterback for Nevada College, that would be using bad in a functional sense because I would not function very well as a quarterback. Just like this quarterback is being sacked, I would be sacked a lot. On the other hand, we say Jeffrey Dahmer was bad in a moral sense. He was a mass murderer. He was a cannibal, and he ate his victims. So therefore, whereas we might want to be mad at the bad quarterback, even shoot him or whatever, we would never put him in prison. On the other hand, we would put Jeffrey Dahmer in prison, and we did put him in prison because he was bad in a moral sense. So make sure that you're being very careful when you talk about right or wrong. Are you talking about it in a moral sense or a functional sense? In this subject, in this issue, as we deal with philosophy, we're talking about morality in a functional sense. First, before we look at the other areas of morality, we need to first come to the question, do right and wrong really exist? And normally, many times we can argue, well, no, they don't. Yes, they do. And we talk about minor issues, but there are some actions which go beyond the pale, which would qualify as horrendous evils. If you've ever had a chance, you probably watched the movie The Boy in Striped Pajamas, or maybe you've not had the chance. I would advise that you go watch it. It is a very sweet story between a young Jewish boy who is in a Nazi concentration camp, and another young boy by the name of Bruno, who is actually the son of the commandant who runs the concentration camp. Bruno does not know what's going on in the concentration camp. He thinks it's a labor camp. His mother thinks it's the same thing as well. But through the course of the movie, both the mother and the boy come to find out about the horrors of the concentration camp. The mother eventually confronts her husband, who is the commandant of the concentration camp. And she says, how can you do such a thing? And he tries to justify himself by saying, this is good for the country. I swore an oath. As a soldier, I must keep my oath. So therefore, he finds ways to justify himself. But his wife is not having it. And at one point, she actually calls him a monster whom his mother could not even love. Bruno, on the other hand, is getting close to Shmuel, who is the little Jewish boy, and they start hanging out, talking, playing games together. But two things happen towards the end of the movie. First of all, the mother has had her fill of her husband being in this kind of situation, and she is adamant that she will take Bruno and his older sister to another place to live with their aunt in Heidelberg. Bruno does not want to leave, but he has to leave. But before he leaves, Shmuel says he has a problem. He cannot find his father. And so Bruno comes up with the idea that he will get into the concentration camp by going through the, digging underneath the wires, the fence, and he will help Shmuel find his father. We can imagine the terrible ending of the movie. What happens is that Bruno does get into the concentration camp. And what happens is they are rounded up and they are exterminated, Bruno as well as the little Jewish boy Shmuel. Right before that happens, or right as it is happening, when the two boys are being exterminated, the father comes to realize that his son is in the concentration camp, and he has been exterminated along with Shmuel. The look on the father's face and the horrifying screams of the mother are just heartrending. And in that moment, the father who had justified killing innocent Jewish children realized his error, that he was wrong, that he was immoral to exterminate those children. But he came to that conclusion whenever his own son was the one being exterminated. And in light of this event, other terrible events we'll talk about in a moment, it is hard to escape the claim that right and wrong truly exists, that it was wrong what happened to those innocent Jewish children there in the Nazi concentration camps. Again, when we speak about such atrocities as the Holocaust, in which the little children were killed, the Jewish children, we're talking about horrendous evils. The Holocaust, again, the extermination of the Jews during World War II by Hitler, was more involved than just the killing of the Jews. Hitler actually led in the slaughter of 18 million people. 6 million of those were Jews. He also had exterminated gypsies, intellectuals who disagreed with his policies, soldiers who disagreed with his policies. Gays were definitely rounded up and exterminated. People who had physical or mental handicaps. Many times they were either exterminated or they were sterilized to make sure that their so-called deformities did not pass on to the next generation. He wanted to create what he called the pure Aryan or super race. Now, we know so much about Hitler because Hollywood does have a lot of Jews who very much influence Hollywood, and they've really been very effective in keeping the Holocaust on the front page of our memories. But there's also Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin rose to power in the late 20s, early 30s in Soviet Russia. Whereas Hitler killed 18 million, Joseph Stalin killed anywhere between 30 to 50 million of his own people. Now, he was a cruel man, but his people loved him. And people wonder, how is it that his people could love him in light of all of his cruelties? The story goes that one day when Joseph Stalin was asked how his people could love him in spite of his atrocities, the story goes he took a chicken and he plucked it of many of its feathers. Well, you can just imagine how traumatized the chicken was whenever he was being traumatized this way, the feathers being pulled out. After he stopped pulling out the feathers, he then took out some kernels of corn and fed the chicken. From that point on, the chicken became his pet. The reason is that the chicken was grateful that Stalin was not hurting him anymore. That is very monstrous. Mao Zedong, as bad as Stalin and Hitler were, he is responsible for the slaughter of 50 to 100 million of his own people. He came to power in China in 1948 and began what's called the Cultural Revolution. It led to the extermination of so many people who refused to go along with the regime. They are not the only ones as well. You also have the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge is coming out of Cambodia. It was a communist socialist regime. And what we saw there, the rise of what we call equal outcome. Now that is a very popular phrase today, equal outcome. We need to research more and more about that because the way they applied it in Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge was that everybody had to be the same. Well, those who took over the government, they were not intellectuals, so it was necessary to exterminate the intellectuals. Anybody not like them was a target for extermination. The result was they pushed Cambodia back to the Dark Ages. Rwanda is tragic. Again, these are small countries, so when you talk about 4 million being exterminated or 500,000 a million, you're talking a large percentage of their population. Rwanda was terrible, the genocide going on there. What was even worse is that the UN had peacekeepers in that area, and they would actually be on top of the mountains and watching as the terrorist guerrillas would go in and slaughter people in the villages. And the UN peace forces would do nothing. That is tragic. These are horrendous, horrific evils. And as a result, it is very difficult to claim that evil and good do not exist in light of all the evil suffering we see in the world. Let's go back now to the father and his change of heart in the movie The Boy in Striped Pajamas. Before the terrible ending occurred in which his son was exterminated, the father's attitude was basically this, that it was okay for other people's children to die, but not his children. Well, that is a violation of the principle of non-contradiction. If it's not okay for children to die, then it's not okay for children to die. So that's a contradiction. He would say this, don't kill children, kill children. Okay, they're both children, so why is it okay for one to die, not the other? Well, first of all, again, that's violating the principle of non-contradiction, because you're saying it's okay, it's not okay. Okay, that is illogical. But you may go, well, it's okay for your children to die, but not my children. In that case, we would say this is an example of narcissism. Now, some want to water it down and call it egocentrism, but I think that's just a very sweet euphemism for a terrible, terrible action, narcissism. So therefore, it violates that principle of non-contradiction to say it's okay for that to happen to you, but not to happen to me. As you said at the beginning of our study in philosophy, as we looked at the principle of non-contradiction, which says that if two statements contradict, one must logically be false, we're seeing how this principle is operating in both the silver rule and also the golden rule. Confucius has basically proposed or expounded on the silver rule. And the silver rule says this, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. Okay? So if I don't want to be harmed, I don't harm you. If I don't want to be murdered, I don't murder you. If I don't want to be stolen from, I don't steal from you. Immanuel Kant and John Stuart, though, they use the golden rule. Again, this comes from Jesus there in Matthew chapter 6 and parallel passages in Luke. And it says basically this, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Now, neither Kant nor Mills are Christians. They do not believe in the deity of Jesus, that is, God the Son. But they saw in this principle the highest moral principle that basically whatever we do should be universal. So if I want something done to me, I should do the same thing to you. Just a little more on the difference between the silver rule and the golden rule. Another person who promoted the silver rule would be Moses. When you read the Ten Commandments, especially the last ones, you see, for example, don't take the name of God in vain. Don't murder, don't steal, do not commit adultery, do not bear false witness, do not covet. These are things you don't do. And basically, you can sit down and do nothing and not break the Ten Commandments. You can go to a church, a mosque, a synagogue, do nothing, and you've never violated the silver rule. But the problem is, have you lived? And that's where the golden rule comes in. If you follow the golden rule, you will not break the silver rule. Why? Because if you love somebody, you will not commit adultery. You will not steal from them. You will not murder them. You will not covet what they have. You will not bear false witness against them. You won't do those things. But on the other hand, you will have a positive life. You will do things that are positive in life. For example, instead of murdering, I'll try to give people life. I'll try to help them in their lives. Instead of stealing, I'll try to give to them. Instead of lying about them, I'll praise them. So therefore, what Augustine said, he said, when you do this kind of life, you're actually on a pilgrimage of love. So therefore, the golden rule is actually a rule that promotes love, care and respect for other people, doing what is best for them and not necessarily what's just always doing what I want to do, what's always best for me. Now, why would I treat somebody kindly? Why would I treat someone with love? I always need to remember that the person I'm dealing with is somebody just like me, just like you. A lot of times you say, well, people are different. Are they really? How many people want to have wonderful relationships in life? How many people want to be successful in life? How many people want to have health? These are all common goals. Now, we may get them different ways. For example, we may go, I want to be successful in life. Maybe you have money by being a successful basketball player, a successful football player, a successful banker. But it's all said and done, we want to be successful. We want to have good things in life. We want to have relationships. We're not all that different. As I said earlier, in the course of the semester, we try to use different sources, different areas of life in order to show you how philosophy works in all sorts of life. Shakespeare is actually dealing with this issue, that the person we harm is just like you and me. He deals with it in the play Merchant of Venice. There is a Jew there by the name of Shylock, and he's being persecuted by Christians. He says this, I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes, basically like you? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, like you? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you and the rest, we shall resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. His point is this, we are all in the same boat. We all are the same. Yes, we have different ways of achieving these wonderful things in our life, but basically, we're all the same. When I hurt somebody, when I look away when somebody else is injured, I'm looking away at somebody who's just like me. I'm injuring somebody just like me. There's another reason why we should also take care of others, look out for others. This seems egocentric, but we do want to take care of ourselves. Basically, I need to help take care of others. I need to stand up for people when they're being wronged for my own benefit. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is one of the great martyrs of the Nazi regime. He was a very prominent theologian, come from the Lutheran Church, and he saw the evil that was emerging with the rise of Hitler and Nazism. Hitler came out in the early 30s and said that everyone should take an oath of obedience to him, absolute obedience, that whatever he said, they would obey. Bonhoeffer went, this is wrong, and actually got on national radio and was warning the German people about this problem. The Nazis found out about what he was doing, and they went in and they cut off the feed. Therefore, his message was cut short to the rest of the nation. Bonhoeffer knew things were really getting bad in Germany, so he left and went to New York to study and teach at Union Theological Seminary. When he was there, he actually got involved in the black communities, the black churches of Harlem, and loved the vibrant worship that was going on that really had a major impact on his life. But he got a letter one day from Karl Barth, who's another one of the great heroes of the confessing church there in Europe at the time of the rise of Nazism. He told Bonhoeffer, he said, Bonhoeffer, you need to get back to Germany. Because if you do not help the German people through the time of great trials, neither will they be willing to listen to you when this is past. If you don't help them during times of darkness, they will not listen to you when the light returns. So he returned to Germany. Now he had brothers-in-law and brothers who were actually involved in like the German version of the CIA, called the Abwehr. And they revealed to him the horrible things that were going on in the concentration camps. Well, they, along with a lot of other German officials, soldiers, who wanted to win the war, they had been so mistreated by France and England after World War I. They wanted revenge, but they didn't like Hitler. Hitler was not part of the aristocracy of Germany. He was not upper crust, and also they did not like what was going on in the concentration camps. And they wanted to kill Hitler, but they had a problem. Since the days of Martin Luther, the Germans have been taught that basically obedience to the ruler was the same thing as obedience to God. And disobedience to the ruler is the same thing as disobedience to God. So therefore, they felt like they could not harm Hitler. Bonhoeffer, though, was so prominent and so respected, such an authority, he gave them the authority to kill Hitler in a moral sense. He gave them the moral authority to kill Hitler. So they went off and they tried to kill Hitler. Unfortunately, they were not successful. The result was a lot of the leaders were rounded up, executed quickly. Bonhoeffer, though, was placed in a German concentration camp. About 15 days before the Allies freed the concentration camp, word came from Himmler that Bonhoeffer was to be exterminated. So they took him out, stripped him, and hung him. Bonhoeffer said this was a real problem which led to the emergence of the Nazis in Germany. He said, first, the Nazis, they came for the communists. But I was not a communist, so I did not speak out. A lot of people were not communists. They didn't like the communists. But since they were not part of that group, they did not speak out. Then they came for the socialists and the trade unionists. But I was neither, so I did not speak out. Then they came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I did not speak out. And when they came out, there was no one left to speak out for me. When they had a chance at the very beginning to speak out, the vast majority of Germans could have put an end to what was going to be a horrific, horrible experience for them, their children, for the nation as a whole. But because they were not part of the groups being targeted at the beginning, the result was they were not able to stop it when it actually came for them. You need to understand that if you don't do something when somebody's being treated unjustly, you are helping create a culture, or you're helping a culture of bullying to continue. You go, well, it doesn't matter, it doesn't really affect me. One day it may affect you. It may not hit you personally. Maybe it might hit your mother. Maybe it may hit your wife, maybe your sister, your child. But if you are an adult, you have an opportunity to help stop that culture of bullying from continuing. And it's your responsibility to help stand up to that culture of bullying. If you do not, then one day it may just come back and hit your home. Now, whenever we talk about ethics, about right and wrong, many times people will raise challenges saying that right and wrong do not really exist. And here are some of the typical ones that are brought up here. And as we look at them, we need to first of all go, do any of these really just violate the principle of non-contradiction? And are they really facts? For example, people claim there's no right and wrong because people have different morals. Also, there's no right and wrong because different cultures had different moralities and different religions had different moralities. And then they will claim morality is just something your parents taught you. First of all, it is true. People had different morals. But that does not mean there's no right and wrong. It just simply says this, according to the principle of non-contradiction, if two people disagree on what's right or wrong, it doesn't mean there's no right or wrong. It just means one of them is wrong. Same way with different moralities and cultures. It just means one culture is right, one culture is wrong. Religions just means that one religion is right, one religion is wrong in those areas of morality where there are contradictions. So differences of beliefs in these different areas does not mean there's no right and wrong. If that's the case, then there's no right and wrong in math because, for example, you may put down an answer which disagrees with your teacher's answer, and the teacher says your answer is wrong. You would then respond, well, no, since we disagree, we have different views on the right answer, there's no right answer. There's no right or wrong. We don't do that. There are standards in every other area of life, and so therefore it would be very strange if there are not standards also in the area of morality. Also, when people claim morality is just something your parents taught you, it's man-made, whatever, that is not a fact. That is a belief. And those who make those claims must also support with facts, evidences, premises, their conclusion that morality is just something your parents taught you. There's also other claims, for example, that basically morality is so different today than what it was in the past. Well, I'm not sure that's really true. About 3,700 years ago, there was a king in the area of southern-day Iraq, modern-day Iraq, in the south there. It's called the Code of Hammurabi. And I knew a young lady, she did research and she compared the morals of today versus back then. And she found a very common morality between today and also back then. For example, in the area of children and their parents, both today and back then, we claim then that children should respect their parents. Now, the punishments were different for those children who disobey their parents. Today, many times children may get a spanking or be put in a timeout chair, or their computers taken away from them, their cell phones taken away from them. On the other hand, 3,700 years ago, they would stone the children. Well, we may go, that's a little harsh, okay? It's really harsh. But we again claim that children should obey their parents, respect their parents. Be very careful about making these kinds of claims or just running with them when you hear them. C.S. Lewis, at the Appendix B of The Abolition of Man, goes and compares different cultures throughout the ages and shows a common morality throughout the ages. Yes, there will be some tweaking, but nothing's radically different like many people would claim or assume.